Hello, I'm Philip Mugglestone, and in this series of videos we're covering the SAP HANA Application Function Modeler. In this video we're going to create our first working example using the Application Function Modeler. We're going to do a KMeans. What we've seen already in previous videos are to check that the AFL is installed and configured, to make sure that the user for working with the AFM is created, that he has the right authorizations, and we also created an initial package using the developer perspective. Now, before we get started with a real KMeans example, there's something that we need to check, and that is the manual. It's very important that you have the Predictive Analysis Library reference manual to hand as you're working with the AFM. So the way we get that is we go to help.sap.com/HANA_appliance. The location of the Predictive Analysis Library manual has changed slightly for SPS 6. In fact, you now need to go to the Reference Information section. And in the Reference Information section, if you just scroll down a little, you'll see that we have the BFL and the PAL. They have their own reference guides. So you should in fact download this guide. You can see at the bottom left here, it's a PDF file. You should download this guide. You're going to need that. It contains very important information for each of the individual algorithms. Now I've already downloaded that, so I'm going to go to my documents, and here we can open up the Predictive Analysis Library manual. It's always worth checking that you've got the latest version, because these manuals are updated on quite a regular basis, not just for each different service pack or SPS, but it's much more frequently than that. So what we would want to do here, for example, is to search, and we might want to look at KMeans, because that's the algorithm we're going to be working with. So we can find KMeans, and then on page 19 we're going to have a little bit more in the way of detail of working with the KMeans. We can see here KMeans. So this is important because it's going to give you some very good information on exactly what are the structures required for the input and the output tables. For example, what are the columns? Should they be character? Should they be string or integer? What do they mean? And that's something we're going to refer to when we're working with the AFM. So let's go back. Now, if you remember before, what we did was we opened the HANA development perspective, and we already created a project. We called it afm.pal. We then registered that in our workspace here, and we in fact created a little KMeans just first example. But now we're going to really work properly. So I removed that previous example. We're going to start from the beginning again. So I'm going to create a new, and then I go to Other. I need to choose in the HANA development area the AFL connector file. It's got this little green icon, so it's easy to make it visible. We need to give a name, so we'll call this one KMeans. And we don't need to put a file suffix. In fact, it knows what kind of file it's going to be, and it will automatically add an .afl pmml suffix for us. So we now see that that file has been created. The fact it's got a little grey diamond on it means that it's actually created and it's been committed to the server, but it's not yet been activated. When it's activated, which means it's basically live running on the server, then that will become green. We'll see that process later. In fact, up here, this is the button we'll use to do the activation, or you can do Control F3. So we've created the KMeans. What we want to do is now is actually define what we're going to do for our KMeans and have it actually build the code for us. Because of course the big advantage of using the application function modeler is that we're not going to have to write the code ourselves. It's going to write the code for us. So we're going to go and have a look at clustering. And let's choose KMeans. We drag that onto our design area. And if we were just to click on KMeans here, and just expand it, you'll see that there are a number of different things that need to be defined for KMeans. We need to define a single input data set, which is a table or a view. We need to define the results, which is an output table, and we also need to define the second output table, which relates to centers. And you'll find details on all three of these tables and what columns and types they need to have in that manual. So that's why it's so important to have the Predictive Analysis Library manual to hand. So let's now go back to HANA Studio. So we need to put some data into this. We need to actually point it at a table or a view. Now I've actually got one already created. So if I go to my, in fact I can do it here from the HANA System Library and look at the catalog. I can go in fact to my own schema and we've got some tables and I've got the KMeans dataset. So if I just preview that, if you've seen other videos, you've already worked with KMeans, you already know this structure. We have an ID column, which is numeric, and then we have one or more different independent columns which are used to perform the k-means. And the k-means is basically going to hopefully find the right number of centers and basically group different rows into meaningful groups based on how close the values of life spend, new spend, income and loyalty are. As I say, we've seen other videos on that, so maybe you want to refer to those if you want to learn more about k-means in detail. So this is our input table. So what we need to do is basically we can just simply drag and drop it. And in fact, we can put it directly on, or we can put it just next to. And I recommend that you put it just next to. What we now see is it understands the properties, knows what we're working with. Okay, and these are the column times. And we get a little green tick in the right because based on the specifications of the columns, in which order, with which types, this table is suitable for the k-means algorithm. So it's already telling us that. And what we can then do is connect it to be the same as the input data set. So that means we can make a connection and we can see that actually this table's got data in it because this middle column is in this gold color. That actually shows us that our table has data in it. Now there's something else that I forgot to show you. We need to do very early on in this process, and that is outside. If we right mouse button and look at the properties, we need to set the schema that we're going to create all of our work in. And for that we're going to use the same one, AFM user schema, and you can create a model name. Effectively it's what's the procedure going to be called. This says procedure name here. What is the procedure going to be called? So we can call this, for example, model k-means. So that's the procedure that actually will get called later. So we set those global properties. We've set the input data. And then we've got the two output tables. Now, to do this, again, we can set the properties. However, by default, at this point, the application function modeler, it doesn't pre-fill those for you. So you actually need to do that yourself. So for and this is why it's so important to reference the manual, because here you can then see, okay, for the output table, what are the different parameters that are going to be required. We can see we've got result and center points with a first column which is integer or string, a second column as integer, and a third column as double. And for centers, we have the first column as integer, and then the other columns from our input table as in double or string, which are going to be double in this case because that's the data we've got. So we're going to now need to put those in. So we can use this plus sign to add. We're going to have actually 3 columns for the results. So I'm now going to name them. In fact, we'll use ID, which is, if we look at our data set, ID integer we already had, so we'll give it the same name. And then we got the center points where we can call that k, and that will be an integer value according to documentation. And then we've also got something called the distance, but this needs to be a double, so we can set that to a double value. And if we now go back, we can see that the result, it's got a green tick. That means that the structure we've set up for this outbound table is appropriate, is correct. Now if we go to the centers, we need to do the same thing. Let's add some columns. Okay, and here we're going to have the k value, which is integer, and then we're going to see for each of our input columns, which were life, spend, so this depends on your data, new, spend, income, and loyalty. Now all of these are going to be doubles normally, so let's change them to double, except one of them I'm going to leave it as integer. And then if we go away from here, what we can see, it's got a red exclamation mark, which means we filled some stuff in, but it does not conform with the specification for the centers output table that's documented in the manual. And that's because this loyalty, it's coming in as a double, so it needs to come out with the same type, which in this case is a double. So if I now change that, you see that we've got green for k-means, we've got green in centers. So it is doing validation on the names and types of position of columns that you're putting into your output tables. So now we've done that, everything is green. It's looking really good. We now need to make this actually available for folks to use. And to do that, what we typically need to do is we go back to it. This is our k-means area. We would save it. So at the top left corner, we can save. And then we would need to activate this. And that's where we go to the top and we see the activate, or Control F3. We hit activate. And now we see that that has changed, and we see that the k-means has now got little gold, not a diamond, but a little gold cylinder on the bottom right of the icon. That means that this has now been activated correctly. If there wasn't some error with it, we may well get a little red check mark there to give us a warning. So now it's activated. What's actually happened is it's generated all of the code needed for us to run this. And if we want, we can click on the SQL tab and see the SQL code that's been generated. So this is very useful. This is the real value proposition of the AFM, because as a developer, we can now cut and paste, take this code and work with it ourselves and embed it into our own application. Now, if we just go back a minute, we'll see there's something I didn't mention already, and that is for the k-means, it's actually generating us not only the output tables, but also this famous parameter table, and he generates it for us with default values for all of the different parameters. So you don't have to know those. And in this case, the group number is actually the number of k. It's the number of groups you want to create, and it defaults to 4. But if we wanted to, we could change that, set it to 3. So we can actually come in and change arguments and values here. And again, if you were then to save, in fact, if you hit activate, it will give the option to save. Okay, we save and activate. It's now done that processing. If we now then look at the SQL, you'll see that the code's changed and the group number has now been set to a value of 3 in the code. So it is generating that code, and you can come here to recreate code if you need to going forward. But more than that, you can actually run this thing. So if we wanted to actually run and actually populate, because right now these tables are empty, you see this preview is empty. If we actually now want to go to the right-hand corner, we can call it, which basically simulates running this bit of code here, which is the call to the procedure that's been created for us. So if we want to do that call ourselves, here we can hit call. It says success. And now we see that the result table, we've got some values. So we can open data preview, and we can see here are our columns, and this is the data. We've got 3 different values for k, starting at 0, so 0, 1, and 2. We've got each of our rows from the input data having been assigned a k value, and the distance from the center of that k for each value. And what we can also see, let's go back, is the centers table. And if we look on that one, we can see the results. Effectively, for each value of k, 0, 1, and 2, we've got the actual center point of each one of these 4 independent variables that we put into the procedure. So we can actually run the whole thing basically from the AFM modeling environment. However, the real value of this, and as we changed it, when you click SQL, it actually regenerates the SQL based on the latest settings, so we can save and activate that. The real proposition of this is not that you're going to come in and run this from the modeling environment each time. It's that you use it at the beginning to do your setup. Then you can come in and, for example, you can cut and paste the code, and however much of it you need, and just go into a normal, let's go to a normal window, normal SQL window, or this could be your application. So this is some code that's running using XS or another environment. And if you actually want to make this call to run the procedure, you just need to take this bottom line and call it. And if you needed to, you could even change the input tables, the output tables to other tables that you create. So it's actually created all of the parameters we need. These have already been run once, so we don't have to do it again. But what we might want to do is clear out the result tables. So we'll drop and recreate the results tables. So if we now run this, you can see that it's run. And it ran pretty fast because KMeans is very fast. It's in memory, it's native with HANA. Then when you actually run it, you can actually then go and, for example, look at your output tables. Let's go to our catalog, and you can see that we've got our KMeans arguments and our centers and results tables, and we can just work with those just like we work with any other table within HANA. So that's what the application function modeler is there to do. It's basically a very neat way of generating the code that's needed. And it's not just this code here. It actually created us this procedure, the procedure we're calling called KMeans model KMeans. It generated that procedure for us, and we didn't have to do it ourselves. We didn't have to use the wrapper generator. We didn't get involved with that at all. It was all done for us programmatically behind the scenes. So now we've seen our first real example using the application function modeler.